So greetings, everyone. It's my very great pleasure to welcome you here today to the Clow Library of Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. The Clow Library is one of the world's foremost Judaica libraries, and it is always a delight to get the opportunity to bring people here, whether in person or virtually. We are in for a treat today as we welcome back a notable alumna. Dr. Christine Palmer received her doctorate in Hebrew Bible and Cognate Studies from this very institution. She is currently a faculty member at the Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, where she teaches courses on Hebrew Bible and leads archaeological study tours of Israel and Jordan. Given those activities and interests, it's no surprise her research focuses on ritual at the intersection of the biblical text and archaeology. And she is active in the promotion of interdisciplinary research on the Bible in the broader cultural world of the ancient Near East. Dr. Palmer has written numerous articles on ancient Israelite dress and is a consultant on the topic for the new International Version Bible translation. She recently co-edited a festschrift in honor of HUC's own Neely Fox, entitled The Body Lived, Cultured, Adorned, published by that premier academic publisher, HUC Press, a work that features original scholarship on clothing and adornment. And here I am without my ephod, and I should be, to introduce a lecture like this. Her talk today, The High Priest's Garments of Splendor, an exploration of biblical text and textile, will illumine priestly apparel from ancient Israel's material culture and discuss its role in liturgy and the formation of community identity, all in 45 minutes. All right, so please join me in welcoming Dr. Christine.
Thank you. Well, it is a distinct joy and privilege to be here, as I did earn my doctorate right here. This is where it all happened, where it all began, researching the priestly garments. So this is a wonderful full circle moment. Just very thankful for the library resources, for the ability to be able to look at ancient texts, both biblical texts and also ancient texts of the ancient world that surrounds biblical Israel, which adds depth and understanding to how we should be looking at these garments. And of course, also the archaeological volumes that are here. So very thankful for the opportunity to come back and share a little bit in 45 minutes. Let's see what we can do in these 45 minutes. So we have a very ambitious program. The topic of dress and clothing is one that right now it has seen a resurgence both in the social sciences and also when it comes to the Hebrew Bible. The way that we have looked at dress and clothing before this time, prior to this time, if you've picked up any books and wondered what did people wear in the ancient world, or what did the high priest wear? I know we've all got that question. That's why we're here. People would tend to look at, scholarship would tend to look at individual pieces of apparel and try to find some kind of symbolism and decode some kind of symbolism. And it's taken us some time to realize that maybe that's just not the best approach, because especially in the case of the high priestly garments, it was never worn one piece at a time, but it's an entire assemblage together. It was not the case that it was worn outside of the sanctuary, but it could only be worn inside of the tabernacle and temple. Therefore, we understand that its function isn't just to symbolize and display something, but actually that priestly dress accomplishes something. It is instrumental. It is ritually performative. The high priest cannot be high priest. He cannot function as one unless he is clothed in the garments of the priesthood. So in light of how we are seeing dress much more dynamically in terms of constructing identity and performing ritual acts, it's important for us to revisit a topic that has been of interest since ancient times. We have ancient witnesses, testimonies of people who saw the high priest in his elaborate, wonderful priestly garments and have said it was like beholding someone who was from another world. So they were quite elaborate and fascinating and worthy of attention. So what I would like to do today, in the time that we have, is focus a little bit on those statements that we see in the biblical text of what the garments are actually accomplishing, and we will do that for a few of the pieces, and to try to contextualize them both in their ritual setting where the high priest was ministering. That's how we find them in the Bible. The high priestly garments are given to us in Exodus 28 when we have instructions of how to construct the tabernacle. They're part and parcel of the tabernacle revelation, the Mishkan. And they're also given to us in Leviticus 8, where we have the ordination of the priesthood. So the garments are given to us in the text in a way that situates them in this daily ritual service. So I would like to contextualize them that way, but also introduce you to some of the archaeology that helps us envision what these look like. Unfortunately, there's not much out there, but maybe fortunately, because I hope some of you are working on that to produce more accurate descriptions and depictions of priestly garments based on the material culture. So let's get started here. We're going to be traveling back to the Mishkan, to the wilderness tent of Israel, where this is the setting where the priesthood is dressed, invested, anointed, adorned, and ordained. Investiture is an integral component of the ordination rite. The priests are right here in this courtyard. They need to wear their garments for 7 days, and during that period, they are transformed. This is one of the first things that we see, the performative, instrumental nature of the garments. During that time period, they're changed from mere men, ordinary men, into holy priests on holy ground. So the garments have the power to ordain and to make them holy, to be able to have access to the dwelling place, the divine dwelling place of the Lord, where they can serve him. It is a ritual act that they wear them. It's not preliminary to them being able to perform their ritual, but actually wearing them is a ritual act in and of itself. And we see this in the text for those of you who are reading out of the Hebrew, that they are to appear lifnei Adonai, before the Lord, which is a technical term in priestly literature designating the divine presence within the sanctuary. Now, wearing those garments, they perform the rites of tamid, that is the regular, ongoing, daily service at the tabernacle. The ritual acts that they perform are wearing the names of the tribes of Israel, both on their shoulders and on the breastpiece, bearing the iniquity on the headpiece, and also wearing the bells on their garments. Let's see if we could get a little bit of a picture. So the garments are for Aaron and his sons to be ordained, and in the rites of succession, when the next priest is going to be made priest, one of Aaron's sons in this hereditary office of the priesthood, he will need to wear these garments, and in 7 days, he will be transformed into a priest. The first thing we'd like to look at are the types of fabrics, because after all, my subtitle is an exploration of biblical text and textile. So you're going to hear a little bit about the textiles. The textiles are very important when we're looking at how do we fashion the role of the high priest through his priestly garments. They are called, in Exodus 28, 2, they're called Bigdei Kodesh, holy garments, because they make the priesthood holy. They consecrate them on holy ground, but in addition, their fabrication is holy. If you take a look at this picture, which is, maybe not archaeologically accurate, but it does convey to you some of the splendor that the high priest was clothed in. I think you can tell already that he looks otherworldly. He looks like someone who is qualified and been made fit to stand on holy ground because he himself has been transformed and made holy. High priestly apparel is woven of the same types of fabrics as what we have for the tabernacle, for the tent of meeting. He wears a lot of clothes. If you see this picture, you might wonder, here we are in Israel. I mean, how many layers is this man going to be donning? But that is a reflex of the tabernacle, where we see that there are 4 successive layers of cloth and leather, and the tabernacle itself has all these layers, and so the man who ministers there has all these layers of fabric. At the time, in the culture of that time, if we were to pan out from this picture and just take a look at any kind of ordinary Israelite who is there, at that time, 99% of the color and fabric was obtained really by just natural animal wool. So we would see people dressed in clothes that were beige and brown and yellow and cream from the sheep, from the wool, or maybe even black if they had that. But we don't see these kind of colors. The colors that produce the priestly garments are holy, they're different, they're unique. And there are 3 that we know as sacramental colors. Our sacramental colors are Techeleth, which is the most famous dye in antiquity. This is known to us as the Tyrian blue that has a little bit of a violet shade to it, and it was derived from the murex snail indigenous to the Mediterranean. Now, there have been installations, dyeing installations that have been found along the coast of northern Israel and up into present-day Lebanon, what was Phoenicia. And we see these crushed snails, and scholars who are interested to know and replicate this technique of dyeing in this color have conducted many modern scientific experiments and are coming up with numbers like it must have taken about 800 snails to produce 1 gram of dye of this Tyrian blue, this blue-purple. So obviously this is a prestige color. This is something that is very valuable, preeminent fabrics. You can have a variety of hues. You can go from light blue to dark purple, which was valued in antiquity. And it was not until the time of the Persians and the Romans that this eventually became a restricted color only for royalty. But at this time, it is a color that is used lavishly for the high priestly garments and also for the tabernacle. We have argaman, the red-purple wool, which is also from a snail, so it's also animal material. And the tola'at shani, which is a dye that is derived from insects, and only a small number of which will yield this kind of dye. So it's a labor-intensive, difficult process that yields such beautiful colors. The fabrics of the priestly garments are mixed. It's not just these valuable colors that you would need to dye in wool, because that's what would take linen. They didn't have cotton at the time, but linen would fade very easily. So all of these are wool. The high priestly garments are a mixture of wool and linen. And as you hear this, some of you may wonder, how can that be? Because we know that there are texts that say you should no way never mix wool and linen, such as Leviticus 19:19. This is known as the shatnez, which is a mixture of wool and linen that was forbidden to ordinary Israelites. because it was the hallmark of holiness. The only place you're going to see this is in the tabernacle and on the high priest, showing it's a visual cue in cloth that, that these are holy people on holy ground. The archaeological record really bears testimony to this as well. Not a lot of cloth has survived, obviously, from that time. But from the different fragments that have been found, especially around the area of the Dead Sea, and especially in Kuntilat Ajrud, which is in the Sinai, it's very, very rare to find a mixture of wool and linen. About 100 fragments, only 3 of them were a mixture, and they were in an area that was thought to be a sanctuary area. So this is very rare. In Israel's tent shrine, then, cloth defines these spheres of holiness. The boundaries of holy ground are marked by 300 cubits of linen cloth, white linen cloth. Let me see if I could take us to a nice visual here so that you could see it. So that it's a plain weave, linen cloth. And then, as you can see, the tent has fabrics that are of a more sacred nature and greater sanctity. And these are the colors that are woven of wool and linen. Of special note is the veil that divides the tabernacle into 2 places: the holy place, that is the sphere of priestly ministry and human activity, and the most holy place on the other side of the dividing veil, which is the divine residence, which is where the divine presence is. This veil is the most elaborate of weaves. There are graded spheres of holiness and graded weaves. This is the 3rd of 3 weaves that we read in the text. That is figural representations of cherubim are woven into the veil. And the only other place that we have this same technique is in the weaving of the ephod. So you see a correspondence between the tent and the priest. Instead of figures of cherubim, though, we have on the ephod gold that is woven throughout. And although gold has no parallel in the tent's fabrics, it reflects all the gold that is inside. So from the perspective of a material technology, we think that the ephod was woven on a loom, and probably you can't do that with gold thread on the loom, but then the gold thread would have been added afterwards in what's known as supplemental weft. Now, the luminosity of the ephod would have been so great that to have all this gold interwoven with it, that it justifies the rabbinic saying that these are vestments of gold. The luminosity is prolific, and girded with the ephod, the priest would have appeared as if he were gold-plated, like all the furniture that is inside the tabernacle. So when we see that there is such correspondence, I think you can see that in the image here too. There's a little small high priest. When you see that there is such correspondence between the tent and what the man is wearing, it leads us to understand that his garments are clothing for access. So the place, the outer courtyard where there are white linen screens, that's where the ordinary priests serve, the common priesthood, and they're dressed in white linen. But the high priest, who is dressed in clothing that reflects the sanctuary, has access to enter the sanctuary. He looks like a scaled down tabernacle. If you look at him right there, he's like a tabernacle in miniature. He's qualified to enter in and perform the daily service. The correspondence is striking, especially when you read it in the Hebrew text, because there is so much about the terminology of priestly dress that is reflected and recapitulated in the tabernacle. And the tabernacle itself, curiously, is spoken of in very anthropomorphic terms. You have the bars that are fashioned into sockets that are called a foot. And curtains are hung off the shoulders of the tabernacle. You have language that almost sounds human. So when you read through these chapters from Exodus 25 on, and you get to 28 and you read about the garments, you have this sense of, is the tabernacle human, or is this priest, is he a tent? He is like a miniature tent. He is the human counterpart to sacred space. And as he becomes this human counterpart to sacred space, dressed just like it, we see that he replicates the layers of the sanctuary in his dress from the inside out. So he is a mini tabernacle in reverse. Going back to this picture where you could see what is outermost in the tabernacle, which are these white linen screens, is innermost for him. He's first dressed with a white linen tunic. Then he has many layers, just like you see on the cutout that the tabernacle has layers. And as we said, the ephod replicates the veil that we see here, the dividing veil. And the breastpiece itself then gives vision to something that is beyond the veil, on the other side of the veil, which is the Holy of Holies, the most holy place. In its shape, that's a perfect square, a perfect cube, and also in its ornamentation. So as we see him here, we understand the access that he has is both to serve and to perform the daily service, but also as he comes out, he is imaging, he is reflecting out to the congregation, to those who are gathered there. He is reflecting to them that which they cannot see. He makes the invisible visible. He makes the unseeable seeable. And if we were to imagine ourselves as worshipers who had come to offer our sacrifices here at the tabernacle, encountering the high priest, we would be able to smell on his robes some of the incense. As he stands before the veil burning incense, we'd smell that on him. We would be able to hear from his robes with the golden bells that are on the hem some of the sounds of worship. And we would be able to see these restricted fabrics and have some kind of imagination of what it must be like in there in God's dwelling place, because we've seen it in him and through him. So he is giving us a vision of those invisible things. I want to go on next to the breastpiece, because this is an important part of what he wears as part of the ephod. It's embroidered of the same holy mixture, and again interwoven with gold. And what we have here are stones, precious stones, semi-precious stones, many efforts at translating the stones. And they're beautiful to see. What I can tell you after having studied this is that most of them have come from distant lands. So these are very valuable and precious stones. And they are sunken into settings in the breastpiece, and they are engraved as seals, the biblical text will tell us. The ritual act that he performs in wearing this is that he bears the names of Israel over his heart, on his heart, when he goes into the holy place, to bring them to regular remembrance before the Lord. That's the ritual act. Now, this pouch that you see in the picture contains the legendary and enigmatic Urim v'Tumim. What are those? What is the Urim and the Thummim? Well, there's a lot we don't know. We don't know exactly what they were, because apparently Moses and apparently the community it was given to, they knew. So it didn't require more explanation than that. But they are lots. They are lots that give divine oracles so that the people of Israel can know the divine will. So they are able to know the mind of God. It's a prophetic garment, then we might think, because they hear God's judgments through these sacred lots. The Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, the LXX, Septuagint, will translate them lights and perfections or truth and perfections. I think I tend to favor more the view that because Urim begins with an Aleph and Tumim begins with a Tav, the first and the last letters of the alphabet, I think that it represents in some way the fullness of divine revelation that Israel had at this time through these lots. So they hear from God through these garments. And the stones that we see that are engraved and sunken into the breastplate that he is to carry with him inside the tent are none other than signet seals that are ubiquitous in the world of the ancient Near East. I'm showing you a little image here of a picture that was taken at the exhibit at the Israel Museum. We have about almost 10,000 precious stones and engraved, inscribed precious stones that have been found. Either the stone itself or the impression of the seal that show us that this was a practice in ancient Israel as it was in the rest of the ancient world. Signet seals are incised with a person's name, and they're worn on a person's body, either as a ring, as you see here in this slide, or they could be affixed with a cord somehow over, just attached with a fibula on a garment on the left side, typically, because you could pull it out with your right hand and seal a document, seal something. So on the left side, so this would be a seal that's worn over your heart. If you recall the words of Shir HaShirim, of set me as a seal on your heart. So that's how seals were worn, and you'll see that these are engraved with the names usually of the people, and typically their patronymic, their family name, their father's name. These were used to represent a person legally in formal transactions. You'll recall that Judah left Tamar with his seal as a concrete token of his personal vow and pledge that he would come back and pay her for her services. So it represents a person. It's as good as your word. It's really an extension of you, legally representing a person. And what we see here, a few of the seals that I have put here, the red one, that belongs to Pedaiah, one of the sons of Jehoiakim, mentioned in 1 Chronicles 3:18. If you see the one on the very, very bottom, the black one with the 3 dots, sunken in dots, that's a really treasured seal because that's a 2,500-year-old seal belonging to a woman. So out of all the seals that I've told you that we've got about 35 that belong to women. And if you read up Proverbs and you see the woman of noble character, she's buying, she's selling, she had to have her own seal. But what's interesting is that we have recovered some of these. So this will speak to us about ancient Israelite society as well. To the left of that, if you see the white seal that's facing up a little bit, that is the seal of the famous Phoenician queen Jezebel. So we've recovered her seal as well. And you remember that she stole her husband Ahab's seal for what she was planning to do. So this is how I think we should be imagining the priestly seals on the breastplate. We don't have anything that we found yet that is square, so maybe we should be re-envisioning this as circular gemstones, because that's how they worked the gemstones in antiquity, in a circular way. I'm showing you here 2 bulla that are discarded lumps of clay that bear the impression of a seal, that have garnered a lot of attention because they're famous people. We have Hezekiah and Isaiah. And this ring right here belongs to a priestly family. Hanan ben Hilkiyahu. We have a Hananiah, and that's mentioned in Nehemiah. And Hilkiyahu was the name of the high priest at the time of Josiah's reforms. So there may be convergence, there may not. These names tend to run in priestly families, but just so you see how they're used. Now these seals are brought into, they're brought into the sanctuary when the high priest is serving as a memorial, l'zikaron, as a regular remembrance before the Lord. So if these legally represent the tribes as their surrogates, because that's what seals did in the ancient world, then when Aaron and every subsequent high priest brings them inside that holy place, it's as if the tribes have come there themselves. It's as if they are standing before the Lord themselves. The stones, the precious stones put on display, a kaleidoscopic petition for blessing and remembrance. And as God sees his people carried and worn over the heart of the high priest, he remembers them with the blessings of the covenant. They become participants in worship. And while the 2 inside the sanctuary, you can't have an ordinary Israelite come inside the sanctuary. That's holy ground. While the 2 are separated on holy ground with cloth barriers and veils and curtains, the one place where the 2 covenant partners come together is on the body of the high priest, because the high priest carries these seals on the breastplate, and on his forehead is inscribed the divine name. So his body becomes that meeting place, the meeting place of heaven and earth, the meeting place of Israel and their God through ritual dress. Checking our time, we're doing great. Our next piece that we want to look at is that very place where the divine name is placed. The instructions tell us that the high priest was to be dressed in a frontlet that was of pure gold. I translate that a rosette frontlet. Most commentators agree that there must have been something embellished on there that was a floral motif. That tzitz, zachav, because the word there, tzitz, is a rosette. These are some examples of golden sheet gold that has been hammered. And if you can see in the picture, there are 2 holes that have been made on either end of those so that they could be tied onto the forehead, onto the head with a cord. Some of these come from Megiddo. The one in the middle that I'm showing you does not come from the land of Israel. It comes from Mari, but I did want to show it to you because it has that what we think was on the frontlet, which was this emblem, this rosette emblem. So this is what people are wearing in the ancient world, and it comports very well with the biblical text. And I think the way that we're supposed to understand this rosette emblem is what we see in the archaeological record in Israel with this jar handle that I'm showing you. This is used to mark vessels at the time of Hezekiah. These are known as the lamellic vessels, and they're marked with this rosette symbol. They're stamped on there to show that these jars and jugs belong to the king. So it's part of the royal administration. So what does it mean that the high priest has one of those and it's on his forehead together with the words Kodesh Ladonai, holy to the Lord? I think the stamp of ownership that he wears and proclaims on his body is that he is a servant of God, that he belongs in this holy space to serve, sharet, to serve, to serve God. So the expression there, holy to, we see that both in biblical text, material remains. It refers to anything that has been dedicated to the Lord and is being used for his purposes. It's got his claim of ownership. So the high priest is stamped on his forehead, which in the ancient world actually is where slaves would be marked. They'd be marked on their forehead, sometimes with permanent markings, sometimes with hairdressing that showed that they were slaves, just so that everybody could see. It's the body's most visible part. And he's marked with a stamp of ownership that declares him as belonging to the Lord. Now, this is a very important piece of priestly apparel because it does something that is very significant for the community. And this is where we're getting into, like, how do we see the garments as ritual garments that have ritual purpose, but also construct community identity. This will be on Aaron's forehead so that he may bear any guilt. It plays a significant role in the daily service, that of bearing the iniquity, nasa avon, the Hebrew idiom there, bearing any guilt from the holy things, all the dedicated offerings, whether it's sacrificial offerings or not, that the Israelites consecrate as their holy gifts. So it's going to be on his forehead tamid, regularly, that they may be accepted. So he bears the nasa avon, he bears the guilt, that they might be accepted. What is meant by bearing this guilt, and how are we to understand it? Most commentators will understand it very, very literally. Baruch Schwartz has written a wonderful article on this, clarifying, and I refer you to him if you want to know a little bit more, that the idiom nasa avon, to bear iniquity, expresses the objective legal guilt. Once an iniquity is committed, there is guilt. It's concrete. It's nothing that can evaporate. It's nothing that can go away. In the Hebrew Bible, it's really conceived of as something very concrete, that can that can stain and defile the sanctuary and the land itself, so that there has to be an annual day of cleansing that the guilt would be removed. Baruch Schwartz says when the offender bears his own guilt, he carries that iniquity about him as an encumbrance, an ever-present yoke, under whose strain he may eventually be crushed. But if someone else takes on that guilt, the offender, the sinner himself, is forgiven because he no longer carries the guilt or its consequences that might lead to punishment. Why does the high priest carry it? He carries it because he is the only one in Israel's ritual sphere that can remove it. And this is enacted on the day of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, when the sanctuary is cleansed from all the guilt that has accrued, that has been perceived and talked about as a very physical entity. When the high priest confesses over the head of a goat, there are 2 goats involved in the ceremony, but for right now, we're just concerned with the confession, where he places both hands on the head of the goat, confesses the nation's sin, and all of that collective guilt comes to rest on the goat's head through the agency of the high priest, who had been carrying it himself the entire year, because we see in the sacrificial system, in the sacrificial ritual, that to place hands is identifying with that offering. And he can't confess something he doesn't have. He's had it. He's carried it on his head all year. He puts it on the head of the goat, that it might be banished away from God's people and away from the divine presence. So he is the one who is able to bear it in order to remove it. And that is something that happens through the priestly frontlet that he wears upon his head as God's servant. This is something that is beautifully remarked upon by the sages. Rabbi Enini Bar Sasson says, why do we see in the Torah, in the book of Leviticus, that the first 7 chapters discuss the offerings, and then that is juxtaposed to the very next chapter, chapter 8, that discusses the priestly garments? This is to tell you that just as the offerings atone, so too the priestly vestments atone. So here's how we see the priestly vestments atoning. In exchange of the priest carrying the sins, he is able then to pronounce the Aaronic blessing. He is able then to, as we were told, that he carries this, he bears this in order that they may be accepted and find favor. And when he does that, the high priest is adorned in a gleaming golden frontlet that we've seen, and he speaks this blessing while he himself embodies that radiant countenance of the Lord. So to hear that pronounced by the high priest, you don't just hear it, but you see it. You see God's favor through the luminous face of the high priest. The last thing I want to talk about in terms of priestly garments that are a ritual act that is performed, Lifnei Adonai, is the ornamented hem. And I think this is one of the more famous aspects of priestly dress. There's even a festschrift upstairs. It's called Pomegranates and Golden Bells. So it's one of those just wonderful visuals. Attached to the robe of the high priest, this is a robe that has no seams at all. It's called perfectly blue. This whole robe is dyed in that techelith, which we know must have been thousands and thousands of snails to be able to produce just this deep blue dye that communicated so much holiness for who he was and how he served, and that he was able to stand in the divine presence. There is alternating pomegranates and golden bells, and the pomegranates, I think we're to think of as tassels. Ancient Israelite garments ended in tassels. And if we had a lot of time, I could show you countless images from the ancient world of when we see Israelites or Canaanites, people from that land, we always see them with tassels on the edges of their garments. And part of that is their weaving technique. They wove on a vertical loom. So when you're done weaving your cloth, you have these hanging threads that would be tied up, and they would end in tassels. So this is distinctive for the people with their tassels, but these are, the high priest has super special tassels, and his are, again, that mixture of the sacerdotal colors and weaves of wool and linen mixture. And he is supposed to tie it off like a little upside down pomegranate bud. The pomegranate is symbolic of fertility and abundance and blessing. It's one of the 7 species. And it also makes for a very good mnemonic for the 613 commandments. So it's a symbol that's used throughout in holy spaces. Pomegranates were a lavish decorative motif in Solomon's temple. We've got 2 pillars in the courtyard, Yahin and Boaz, and they're pillars of bronze. They were crowned with a chain work of wreaths of 200 pomegranates each. So we see that fertility, abundance, blessing, the blessing of God in these sacred spaces. These are alternating with golden bells. And for the bells, I can show you something that's a little bit closer to the time of the text, just a little bit closer. To the left, we have a mosaic that comes from Sepphoris. And this is just this beautiful carpet mosaic in the synagogue that as you walk in, you see these ritual scenes unfold that inspire you. The space really inspires you. It begins with Abraham having taken off his shoes and ready to sacrifice his son. It's the Akedah. And as we move further up, part of the mosaic is the ordination of Aaron. And we have the bull that remains, and we have the laver that remains, and we have these tabernacle implements that remain. But sadly, the priest himself and his garments have been damaged with the passage of time. So I wish I could see those. I wish I could see what was in the mind of those who created the mosaic. But what we do have, and I want to call your attention to, is a little golden bell at the edge of the garment of that mosaic. To the right, you're going to see another bell that's been excavated from the sacred precinct at Mount Gerizim from the Hellenistic period. It's a golden, pure gold bell with a silver clapper, and you see it's got a little loop that it could be fastened and affixed to garments. And the excavators believe that, yes, certainly it must have been a priestly garment that this came off of. And closer even yet, the round bell that you see is a design that comes from Jerusalem. And this is a golden bell with a vertical ribbed pattern and again, a loop that we see that comes from the Second Temple period. So even closer still. I don't know if you will be able to hear it, but I'm going to try it anyway. I'm going to try to play it for you so that you hear what this golden bell sounds like. I've got last December, I took a group to Israel for an archaeological study tour, and I had the privilege of touring with Eli Shukron and Ronnie Reich, who are here in these pictures, and they are the excavators of this golden bell. So we had time to talk about this as we were making our way around the city. And this was found, I'm showing you the location where it was found. It was found in a drainage channel that ran alongside of the western wall of the Temple Mount, right underneath Robinson's Arch. And they believe that the bell fell into Jerusalem's drainage channel from the area of the Temple Mount. And it just remained there until 2011, until they found it, as they dug it up with all the dirt and the earth that was there. And they really do believe that this had to have come. Who else would have been wearing bells on their garments? So let me just see if I can play that for you, if you can hear it. At least for those in the room. The rabbinic sources are, they say there could have been 36, maybe 70 bells, but just imagine, just that sound, magnify that by 70. I think 70 is a good biblical number. I might just go with that. Just imagine that, and just imagine hearing as the high priest is ministering when he puts on his garments, that's the beginning of ritual time. And when he takes them off, that's the end of ritual time. You hear worship. So what I see in these garments, and I hope you've seen in this visual introduction really that we've had, is that through the ritual garments of the high priest, that there is a meeting of worlds. He is God's chosen servant, anointed with holy oil to stand between heaven and earth. If the tabernacle is the divine dwelling, that's the place where God himself is. And that's where, you know, Leviticus especially likes to call that not the Mishkan, but likes to call it the Ohel Moed. It's the place of the appointed meeting times of where God would meet with his covenant people. And as this happens, it happens through the ministry, but also through the ritual garments of the high priest. As he wears the bells, he is heard by God, but also by those who are worshiping. He bears the names for remembrance through the breastpiece. And through the breastpiece also, God can speak to his people. Through the plate, he carries their iniquities and exchanges that for favor and blessing. These are exchanges. Here we are at this intersection of heaven and earth. These are exchanges between heaven and earth, between God and his people, and they're all happening through these ritual priestly garments. And that's why it's important and significant for us to look at them together to get a better idea of what the high priest's role was, but also who Israel was, that they were brought in to worship, that their names were worn on the body of the priest, engraved on durable stones, that he was dressed in fabrics that would not fade because it was the only steadfast dye in antiquity. And as he's dressed in these clothes, there's an aura of permanence. There's something permanent to stones the colors that will never fade, gold that will never tarnish, stones that are durable, names that are engraved and cannot be erased. There's something permanent about Israel being remembered before the divine presence and remembered as a memorial, Lissikaron, for blessing before God. The final piece that relates to the high priest that I think is important for us is that there's an invitation at the end of this. There's the Lord's invitation to Israel to do something to their garments that would express this covenant relationship and that would also share in the holiness of the priestly garments. I'm showing you a tablet here to show you that a garment's hem was very significant in antiquity. It was used in enactments, legal enactments that were binding and had great power to speak legally. Marriages were performed by pulling the hem of the garment over the woman to be wed, as you've seen with Ruth, or as you might remember Ezekiel's prophecies. Marriages were established and also dissolved through the hem of the garment. People came to office and also abdicated through the hem of the garment. Here we have a tablet that shows us that on the right-hand side, it's a loan for barley. But on the bottom, the signature that you have is someone impressing the hem of the garment on this tablet as if it was their signature, looking at this hem as an extension of themselves. So what Israelites are asked to do on the hem of their garments is to fashion the tzitzit that is going to be in this techeleth color. It's going to be in this vibrant, expensive blue color that is holy and reserved for the holy place. And they are to do that to remember as they attach a cord of blue to their tassel. They are to do that to remember to be holy before the Lord, because we associate this color with holiness. And they on their garments wear a piece, a part of that holy mixture. The identity of the nation is to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, as per Exodus 19, verses 5 and 6. Their holiness is tied to the high priest who represents them. They have a piece of his holy fabrics on their garments. The high priest's holiness, in turn, is tied to the holiness of the sanctuary because he's clothed in garments that reflect the sanctuary. And the sanctuary, in turn, is made holy by the divine presence that is there, making him and all of Israel holy, as one of the lasting refrains of Leviticus is, "Be holy, for I, your God, am holy." So coming full circle, we see the priestly holiness to mediate worship, relationship between God and his people ritually through the garments, but also to fold them into a community identity of holiness and distinctiveness in the world of their time through these blue cords. I think this is a wonderful place to pause and see if we have any answers. And maybe some questions.
Have maybe 5 or 10 minutes for questions. We have a lot online, but let's take 1 or 2 from the audience here first.
I have a question on just the inner layer made out of white linen. Ezekiel says that you're not supposed to sweat before the Lord. Is that garment designed to absorb sweat or the evidence of sin, because that's the only kind of material that touches the skin?
Yeah, that's a great question. So linen, I think linen is great for that, for there not to be any sweat. But I think there's also something to the smell that I think when you're approaching the divine presence, and here I'm thinking especially of Yom Kippur, when you're approaching, the high priest is surrounded with incense, not only for him to be able to veil his eyes, he's bringing in this portable cloud, but I think he's supposed to smell like the sanctuary. These are smells exclusive to the sanctuary, that to be received and for the wrath of God not to break out against you, you need to smell like him, which may have something to do with sin, as you said. But I think there's something to smelling like the sanctuary itself. Holy and the common are divided, very much so. CJ.
Do you detect any significance between the luminous ephod, the priestly blessing in number 6 on the one hand, and then Moses' shining face, perhaps falling face in Exodus 3?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think Moses, having stood before the Lord, has instead of the rosette stamp, he has an image of the luminous glory of the Lord stamped upon his face, which needs to be drawn and hidden. Only when he speaks, then he unveils to show that these are the words of God. And to take it one step further, I think what happened to Moses is being replicated for Aaron and every subsequent high priest, that they are clothed with an image of the glory. Exodus 28:2 tells us that these are garments lekavod letiferet. So therefore, the expression, the material expression, concrete expression of divine luminosity and glory through textile. I think that's a wonderful connection.
Are there any disagreements or areas of gray of what these garments look like compared to like traditional scholarship versus like Jewish scholarship or institutions like the Temple Institute in Jerusalem that said we're going to actually recreate what these look like?
Mm-hmm. That is a fantastic question. I think again, the biblical text is very laconic with descriptions of dress. So when we come up to 70 verses over priestly dress, we think that we've heard a lot. But if we were to go and try to reproduce all of these things, we would see the gaps, and we would see where there's so much that we don't understand. So in those gaps, there has been a growing interpretation. So the rabbinic discourse over this will be, okay, pomegranates and golden bells, but how many? And what do they look like? And are they, even as you saw those 2 bells, one is an open bell and the other one is closed. And one of the excavators, Eli Shukron, thought that that the bell had been designed to look like a pomegranate. So he had the question of the Jerusalem bell. Were there actually pomegranates and bells or just bells? There's discussion of, is the bell inside the pomegranate? So it spawns a lot more questions, even though it seems exhaustive in its detail, it is not. So I think for the Temple Institute, I do look at their things. I am very curious. And one of the things that they differ in is that their blue is a lighter colored blue, because I think Tekelet in modern Hebrew might be a lighter hue, a lighter color. So there are some differences in how they interpret things. And that's the value for me of looking at the archaeological material. What are the technologies that they would have had when they were commanded to make these? What could they look like? What would it have been like? To help put some guardrails in our imagination. It's a great question.
How did they produce all this in the wilderness? And how did they know how the cherubim was built?
Yeah, how did they produce all of this? Well, one of the layers is leather. I mean, I think that being in the wilderness doesn't mean that you are without resources. So according to the text, if we look at it purely textually, we would say, hey, they just plundered Egypt. They've got a lot of jewels. They've got a lot of gold. They can make all of these things. And there's a nice literary gratification to that, because when you fight a battle and you plunder the enemy and you use it for your own building projects, that's what everybody does. So yes, they could have had those things from Egypt, but also Israel is at the crossroads of civilizations. They are the land bridge between two major empires, and there's so much traffic that goes through. I think they would have had plenty of resources for these things.
How did they actually weave it? Because they were told how to weave it, and then weave the cherubim in, like, what that looks like.
I think they knew. I think they knew. When we look at the iconography of the ancient world, there are a lot of shared cultural elements, like maybe the way that we dress today. We can all look somewhat alike, but then if you talk to us, we have different faith commitments, different political commitments, different, go on. But where we see the distinctiveness, I think is in some other ways. One of the major ways we see distinctiveness when it comes to the tabernacle is there are no images, there are no statues, there are no what other nations had. So there are some similarities and some distinctives.
Yeah, share one of the questions online related to this. A lot of people were asking who made the garments. Do we have any traditions about who was involved in, the actual techniques?
We do have the naming of two men, Bezalel and Aholiab, who are artisans, who are craftsmen, who have made a lot of these, but we also have the mention of women who are weaving, who in Exodus, we are told that they gave up their bronze mirrors so that they could be melted down to make the labor and the sacrificial altar. Later in Kings, we also see that there are weaving installations in the temple, and at times those go awry. We have some women who are weaving batim to Asherah, so they can go awry. But I think that the temple later the temple was a place where you had a lot of different people contributing to a very vibrant and ongoing worship. But in the wilderness, I would have expected both men and women contributing. Yeah, Chris.
So, scholars have identified a lot of ways in which Edenic imagery is reduplicated in the tabernacle and the temple. Are there ways in which the garments participate in that Edenic imagery?
Oh yeah, I think so. I think to see the abundance of for those who are online, how do the garments participate in the imagery of Eden that we know is stamped all over the temple tabernacle. I think they participate in that way through the pomegranates with that lush plant at every tree that is known to mankind in this garden for God to show his dominion. I think the walking, for the priest to be walking and to hear a rustling sound might even recall for us some of the scriptures of God himself walking in the Garden of Eden and how Adam and Eve would have heard some kind of rustling. So I think it is very much the case that that we are supposed to look at these things and tap into. Some people would use the word mythology. Some people might use the word theology. Tap into these broader narratives of Scripture.
Thank you for the presentation. It's very nice. I got a question that ties in with the first question on linen and sweat. I'm wondering the weight of the gold. Gold is a very dense metal. It's extremely dense. And if you start putting all these items on gold, even plated gold thread, it would still be pretty heavy. So what was, I know it's conjectural, but this is a heavy thing. This piece walking around all this heavy stuff on might cause it to sweat. Right.
Indeed, it might, but I don't think it looked like we see. I haven't seen anything. We do have tunics. We do have garments from the ancient world, and I have never seen any of them with such billowing fabrics as you do in these pictures that are created for us. But partly, if you were to be wearing garments that were metallic and heavy with stones and many layers, I think that would affect the comportment of the priest to be walking around in a more stately, deliberate way, which again might connect a little bit more to him being a representative. He represents God to the people and the people to God, that they may have seen him and seen something beyond him, if I could say, of what he represents. The sweat bit is in Ezekiel, so we don't have anything yet in Exodus that is talking about sweat, although I'm sure that was part of the picture. Are there any, should we take any other questions?
Yeah, I'll take one more from online. A lot of people were asking about the connection between the high priest's garb and the burial shrouds. So what is the connection, or is that intentional?
The linen burial shrouds? I'm not sure that I know that there is a connection, but I haven't looked into that. I apologize, but that does makes very good sense to be placed.
Okay, and then one more related, and the Torah covers. Is there a connection between the Torah garb and the priest garb?
I think that is a wonderful observation, and I personally think that there is. I do think that there is. And we have to remember that religion and the practice of ritual is very conservative in terms of things perpetuate over time. What we've done, we'll do again, and perhaps do in greater and more ways. And so if priests are not wearing that, we find a way to incorporate that in our worship because it's meaningful to us. I do think there is.
Take one more audience.
Talking about reconstruction of what it may have been like, are there any reconstructions, visual, what have you, that you think accurately reflect the priestly garments at any point in time in Jewish history?
That's a broad question. Are there any reconstructions that faithfully reflect the priestly garments? I think that there are a lot of reconstructions that come close. And I think that's what I'll say. But I have not seen too many or any that incorporate a lot of the material culture. Some of the commentaries will be good, like the Anchor Bible commentary, Prop and Exodus, Milgram and Leviticus. Those are good with technical attention to detail, and Jacob Milgram especially will take into account the rabbinic commentary and try to give us a good idea. but I don't see too many looking at like what could they do? What did they have? What did these things look like? And let's try to make it look that way. Which originally I think Israel would have, they would have known what those stones were. I mean, they knew what they were. They all had them. And I think there would have been a greater level of understanding then. So I hope if there are any of you who are creative, artistic, please come talk to me, because I will be publishing a monograph on this topic and would love to have your help recreate this in some way.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful.
Thank you for having me.